Stephen Silverman. Welcome, Stephen.
Evening.
The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has not been backwards in coming forwards with his view. He has blamed the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and indeed his government of pouring, and I quote, fuel on the anti-Semitic fire before the mass shooting that left at least 15 dead. An attack by Muslim men, two Muslim men with rifles on Jewish people celebrating Hanukkah. Let's not go down the BBC route of saying, oh, it was a shooting at Bondi Beach that involved some Jewish people. It was a direct attack by Muslims, two Muslim lunatics, on Jewish people celebrating Hanukkah. Let's get that right. But before this, Netanyahu pointing this out, other critics pointing this out, Albanese long track record of tolerating anti-Semitism. Not so long ago, when they have their pro-Palestine protests in Australia, they're similar to here. Recently, there was one outside the Sydney Opera House where the police just stood and watched while the crowd chanted, "Gas the Jews, gas the Jews." Does that ring any bells to what happens here? Yes, it does, doesn't it? So there are uncanny parallels to what's been happening in Australia to what's happening here in Britain. Albanese making all the right noises today, but he's basically stood by as anti-Semitism increased on an alarming level in his country. And you might argue that now those poor Jewish people on Bondi Beach are paying the cost.
Yeah, well, look, I'm not even certain that it's even worth differentiating between countries at this moment in time. The entire Western world, the entire democratic world, is in the grip of an outbreak of anti-Semitism, the like of which we haven't seen since the Second World War. And it's called, very frequently, it's called a virus for very good reasons, because once it takes hold, it courses through society. And it is very difficult to find a vaccination for it, and that is the situation we find ourselves in today. It is absolutely rampant. What happened in Australia could have so easily happened anywhere else in the world, and although it seems to have happened here a few months ago on a smaller scale, it could have actually been a far greater mass shooting, because there are two people currently in detention. It is alleged that they had firearms and ammunition and were just waiting for the delivery of hundreds more rounds of firearms before they launched a mass attack on the Jewish community. So, you know, this is where we are today. The Western democratic liberal values that we all depend on are under a massive assault, and Jews are simply first in the firing line. But they are only the first. This is a threat to our entire civilization.
Let's talk about, it was September the 21st, when both Australia, Albanese, and Britain, Starmer, recognised Palestine on the same day. It was only 12 days later that we had the Manchester synagogue attack, October the 2nd, I think it was. And now we've got Bondi, a couple of months later, admittedly, but we've got Bondi Beach. Netanyahu saying, you let the disease spread and the result is the horrific attack on Jews that we saw today. Though recognising Palestine, when it happened, I was shocked. I was shocked when Macron did it. I was shocked when we did it. Because it was a blatant, palpable reward to Hamas for October the 7th. You invade Israel, you massacre more than 1,200 people, including women and babies. You rape women, you put babies in the oven, and a couple of years later, we reward you by recognising Palestine. And that recognition, Stephen, seems to me to have emboldened these maniacs, the maniac who attacked the Manchester synagogue and the maniacs who attacked the poor Jews on Bondi Beach. There's a direct correlation, I think, between the official recognition of Palestine and what's going on now among these terrorists.
Well, the recognition of Palestine was a purely performative gesture that did absolutely nothing to help the Palestinians. And let's remember that it was done while Jewish hostages were still being held in tunnels in Gaza and tortured and murdered, with absolutely no requirement for them to do anything to stop that. But I think it was just part of an overall package of incidents and things that have been allowed to happen. And it was the icing on the cake. On its own, I don't think it did it, but as part of the overall scenario in which we've seen double standards in policing, where anti-Semitic hate marches are tolerated and indulged, where we have professional regulators who, when confronted with evidence of their members spewing anti-Semitic rhetoric, the like of which would have been at home in 1930s Germany, decide that they've done nothing to bring the reputation of the profession into any disrepute, and that we have had successive governments that have refused to act when they've had powers to act. It's all of those things, together with the recognition of the Palestinian state, that has contributed to this. And as I said earlier, when you reward terrorism, you get more terrorism.
Exactly right. Albanese, as I say, making all the right noises since this atrocity, saying the Jewish community are hurting. Today, all Australians wrap our arms around them and say, we stand with you. We will do whatever is necessary to stamp out anti-Semitism. It is a scourge and we will eradicate it together. My question to Anthony Albanese would be this. Since you're now talking about wrapping your arms around the Jewish community and saying we stand with you, how do you think, Anthony, you made the Jewish community in Australia feel on September the 21st when, as you say, Stephen, for no real reason at all, you recognised Palestine, you rewarded Hamas, you rewarded those killing rapist thugs of Hamas by recognising Palestine? How do you think Mr. Albanese feels that he made the Jewish community in Australia feel that day?
Yeah, it's interesting. It really raises a question, not one that is usually asked, of what should be done, because we know what should be done. It's glaringly obvious and has been for a very long time. The real question is, why is it not being done? Why are governments not taking the actions they should be taking to stem this tide of extremism that threatens, the very existence of their societies? And this performative, hand-wringing nonsense, thoughts and prayers, it's nothing. It will simply infuriate the Jewish people. Because they've heard it so many times, and they can count on the fingers of one hand the number of times it's translated into actual concrete measures to deal with this problem. Now, the real question is why? And there we're in the arena of speculation, and we can't be certain. There are a number of possible reasons for it. None of them are flattering, but it's where we are, and somebody really needs to get a grip of this now before it's too late. We are running out of time.
And what did you feel about Albanese today announcing that the way to deal with what happened on Bondi Beach was to have a crackdown on gun control laws? Now, Australia has the strictest gun control laws in the Western world, so it hardly needs that. It's not about guns. In fact, the father of these two lunatics, the older one, the father, was a fully licensed weapon holder, so he was allowed to have these guns. So gun control wouldn't make any difference at all.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of months ago, Jews were murdered in Manchester with knives. So,
well, exactly right. It's this refusal to confront what happened, really, what happened and what this was about. A lot of the reports, obviously the BBC leading the charge, but to be fair, a lot of media organisations very reluctant yesterday to say anything more than this. There was a terrible shooting, a gun attack on Bondi Beach. Some of the victims were Jewish. You know, they knew what was going on. They knew what happened. This was two Muslim men shooting Jews celebrating Hanukkah, and yet this reluctance to characterise it for what it actually was. And Albanese, by saying, oh, let's crack down on gun control, I think he's part of the same syndrome, a kind of abject refusal to confront the horrific reality of what happened yesterday. And it happens every single time. You know, there's this impulse to dilute the fact this was an Islamic attack on Jewish people.
Yeah, there seems to be a real reluctance to do two things. One, say anything that might actually engender any sympathy for the Jewish people in the wake of October the 7th, but also to be very clear about where the problem is coming from. We do have a serious problem with Islamist extremism in the Western world. It's undeniable. It's there in front of our eyes. Yet too many people in power do not want to be very, very clear about that. Whether it's because they're frightened of being called racist or for any other reason, it's hard to say. As I say, we're in the area of speculation. But it is intolerable. And we are at breaking point. Something really has to be done to break this cycle of denial if we're going to move. And I stress what I said earlier. This is not just a threat to Jews. It's everybody who prizes our democratic our values.
Yeah, worth mentioning that essentially what we saw, 15 people died, 39 injured. Nearly all of them were, okay, they were Jewish, but they were Australians. You see what I mean? Just as the people killed in Manchester were British. People who happen to be Jewish. How is the Jewish community in Britain feeling today after what happened in Australia yesterday? Because as you said, Stephen, I think there are uncomfortable, uncanny parallels between what has been happening and what has happened in Australia and what has been happening here in Britain.
I mean, it's almost becoming a cliche now, but I think it's this balance between shock and surprise. Deeply, profoundly shocked by what happened, but not remotely surprised that it happened, because we've all been expecting it. And we're probably all expecting it to happen again somewhere else, unless, you know, there are really serious concrete measures taken to deal with this problem of Islamist extremist violence supported by radical left progressives who have made it their life's work to demonize Jews and the Jewish state.
Yeah, so what Albanese should be talking about today is not the far right, who are completely irrelevant, and as I said earlier, incidentally, have never committed any terrorism in Australia ever. He needs not to be talking about that. He needs not to be talking about the irrelevant issue also of gun control. He needs to be talking about the real problem here, which is the explosion of anti-Semitism and its continued rise and rise. That's what he needs to be talking about, but he's not talking about that. And it's the same deal in this country, isn't it, Stephen? We need to hear more from our government about what they're going to do about anti-Semitism. How about, for a start, these pro-Palestinian marches that we see every weekend snaking through our cities, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people. I'm against banning them because I believe in the freedom to demonstrate, but if they break our laws, such as chanting, you know, for the annihilation of Israel, the murder of Jews, you know, from the river to the sea, etc., etc., they should be arrested. Jihad chanters should be arrested. They're not being. That would be a good start, wouldn't it?
Well, part of the problem is that we've all been seduced into calling them pro-Palestinian marches when they're anything but.
Yes, I know what you
If
mean.
they were pro-Palestinian marches, they would have been calling for the things that would have given relief to the Palestinian people very, very quickly, namely the surrender of Hamas and the release of the Israeli hostages. Were they calling for that? No. They were calling for the destruction of the only Jewish state in the world. They were calling for the Intifada to be globalized, which basically means let's kill the Jews everywhere. They were wielding swastikas intertwined with the Stars of David. They were chanting ancient Arabic chants recalling a massacre of Jews in the Middle Ages as a threat that it's coming again. These are not pro-Palestine marches. They are anti-Semitic hate marches. And one of the reasons they've been allowed to go on for this long is because people have been duped into believing that they are some sort of humanitarian cause. You know, the hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of people who have died and are dying in Ethiopia, Sudan, Yemen, the Congo, not a peep from anybody.
Stephen, listen, thank you so much for talking to us. I'm very sorry for the loss of the Jewish people in Australia. It's a disgrace, an absolute disgrace. And I thank you for coming on. Always a pleasure to talk to Stephen Silverman there, Director of Investigations and Enforcement at the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism.